Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Summerhall? Jon? They were less than a day from it, and both he and Rhaenyra were nervous. This was where it had all almost ended. They had lost so much here, and yet it was also where his father was born. Where Duncan the Tall saved his grandmother and ensured his father was born. Among salt and smoke, his father had been brought into this world, and because of it, he believed himself to be the prince that was promised. Now, according to everyone that was him, it was always supposed to be him, and not even death, it seemed, was going to stop that. Maya had shown him as much, Rosiades agreed with her, and he'd seen the dragon fly over Summerhall. Was it true? Was he inevitable, as Maya said? And if so, was he worth it? Sitting there under the bright light of the sun, he questioned it, as he had since she'd spoken to him. "What's on your mind, my king?" Arthur asked, taking him from his thoughts. "What?" he said, shaking his head. "There are times when I look at you and I see your mother, Jaxie. Others when you are your father's son. Right now, it's the latter, so speak. What's on your mind, my king?" Maya, the things she showed me, the things she said, I don't know, it's one thing being told you're some prophesized prince. It's another seeing it, being shown that no matter what, you were almost meant to be. What did she show you? What do you know of Prince Duncan? He asked. The Prince of Dragonflies, Arthur said with a chuckle. I know he married for love, that he gave up the throne for the woman he wished to be with, Arthur said. But he and so many more lost their lives in Summerhall. He was supposed to be my grandfather, Jon said, and Arthur looked at him oddly. How could that be? I don't know Arthur, but his wife, Jenny, she was pregnant with the man who was supposed to be my father, Daeron Targaryen. He would have been named, as would I. Jon said sadly. But then how? Arthur asked, confused. I had to be born when Prince Duncan, when Jenny died. They switched me. I don't know how, but they switched me. And you believe this? Arthur asked. I was taken away in the embrace of a dragon and then returned. That's what she told me. I saw it, Arthur, with Rhaenys. I saw it. I know how crazy it sounds. Believe me, I do. But I saw it, Jon said softly. Saw what? I saw the dragon over Summerhall, over the Red Keep, over Casterly Rock, and over the Tower of Joy. I saw a dragon being born. I was that dragon Arthur, Rhaenys was. Tyrion was. You realize how that sounds? Arthur said, and Jon laughed. I realize more than you think. You think I don't wish to ignore all of this, that I don't worry. I'm as mad as my grandfather was. Every day I find myself worrying about that, thinking of that. Do you think me mad, Arthur? He asked, his eyes on the night. I don't know, my king, Arthur answered, and Jon was glad of the honesty. When you do give me a shout, I'd really like to know, Jon said as he got up and walked over to lay down. Arthur chuckling behind him. Sleep, though, was hard to find that day. Just speaking of what Maya had told him left it playing on his mind. In both lives, he had lost his father and mother before he was born, almost as if that too was predestined. Prince Duncan had given up his throne for love, and while his father had hoped to keep his, had he not done the same thing in a way? Had he not basically thrown away what he was to be who he wished to be with who he wished to be with? Love is the bane of honor, the death of duty. What is honor compared to a woman's love? What is duty against the feel of a newborn son in your arms, or the memory of a brother's smile? Wind and words. Wind and words. We are only human, and the gods have fashioned us for love. That is our great glory, and our great tragedy. He woke up with a start, the voice reverberating in his head. A woman's voice, and he wondered if it was his mother he'd heard, or the words feeling somewhat familiar to him. As he threw some water on his face and stood by the small stream, he tried to remember where he'd heard them before. It didn't take him long, and he resolved to ask Oberyn to bring him a copy of Eia's letter when next they met. Are you well, my king? Arthur asked. I am. Bad dreams, Arthur, he said with a soft smile. I was thinking, Prince Duncan, you should speak to Barristan about it. Arthur said, and Jon nodded. I will. You ready? He asked. I am. With night just about to fall, he climbed up on Rhaenys's back, the flight taking them only a few hours. Looking down on the keep, he smiled to see it was exactly as he had seen it in his visions, Rhaenys seeming even happier as she looked at the large open space in the middle. She landed carefully, and as he and Arthur climbed down, Jon looked around. They were in the middle of the castle grounds themselves. What he imagined had once been the Godswood, though it was empty now. It did, however, provide cover for Rhaenys, and as he walked over and leaned in, he felt his sister's own feelings threatening to burst forward. "Rosiers! I'm well, little brother. Tired. I wish to rest," she said, her voice far softer than usual. "I'm here for you," he said, and she brushed up against him. Not more than a moment later, she'd closed her eyes and was asleep. He and Arthur began to walk around the Godswood. No trees had grown here, there was little grass and very few flowers and plants. It was as if life had decided to abandon this place. They walked into the crumbling ruins, and as they did, he suddenly got an image in his head, a silver-haired man sitting alone playing his harp, the stars shining above him. "Arthur, did my father ever come here?" he asked. "Alone, only alone, my king," Arthur said, and Jon smiled at that. He could understand not wishing to share certain things with others. They entered a large room, and he could see scorch marks on the floor, though no natural fire caused these. The stone itself had almost melted beneath them, and he couldn't imagine just how much heat that would require. Harrenhal's towers had been blackened by Bellyrion's flames, but here the stone was almost glassy-like and colorless. Moving further into the room, he felt as if he was walking among shadows. Each time he blinked, he could see them. Those who had walked these halls before were all calling to him now. They kept walking. Arthur letting him lead the way, and Jon not understanding why he desired to go this way and not that, or why he ignored this room while walking into a different one. "Idenity," Arthur said, but he barely heard him. His eyes closed, he listened to the music, the celebration, and the happy voices following them as they danced, as they moved around the room. He saw his great-great-grandfather, Aegon the Unlikely, sitting on a chair. Saw Duncan the Tall standing to his right. He saw his grandmother speaking to the woman who could have been she, both of them heavily pregnant. He moved closer, and they began to move to another room. Jon hurrying after them in an attempt to catch them, to speak to them, even though they were ghosts of the past. Entering the other room, he saw a pyre, and resting above it, a number of dragon eggs. Beneath it lay jars of a green liquid, and yet his attention was drawn away from it. The man moved quickly, and so he followed him, looking on as he began to spill green liquid around the edge of the room. "Stop! What are you doing?" he shouted, and for the briefest moment, the man and Prince Duncan looked to him. The fire began then, and as he looked on, he saw the man try to run, his gray robe catching a flame, and yet, compared to others, he was lucky. Inside the room, the green fire exploded. Prince Duncan grabbed his wife, but the flames were too quick and were upon them before they could move. He looked to see Aegon covered in flame and followed as Duncan the Tall helped his grandmother from the room. "You lad, watch her. I need to go back in," Duncan called out, and Jon looked at him as if he was crazy. "Now lad, there's not much time. Protect the princess," Duncan said, and Jon moved and knelt down beside his grandmother. "It will all be all right," he said, and she smiled at him and reached her hand to his face. "The innocence of youth, nothing will ever be the same after today," she said softly. "Do you need anything?" he asked, and she shook her head before she cried out in pain. More and more people surrounded them, and a woman knelt down and shouted for others to bring water and cloth, and he realized then that the babe was coming. His father was being born. Was this it? This the answer he sought? He felt torn. A part of him telling him to stay, and another telling him to go back inside. It was that part he listened to, and as he walked through the flames, he felt no heat. He found himself in darkness, and as he looked around, he saw it on the floor, the egg seeming to shine, and he reached out to touch it. The warmth was dull, but it was there. He turned and saw another, and then another. Moving through the room, he found a chest and tried to open it to no avail. Looking up, he saw the moon high in the sky, the light reflecting, and then it was darkness once again. Yay, my king?" He opened his eyes to see Arthur looking at him, his features showing both his concern and his relief. Reaching out, he took Arthur's offered hand and stood up, finding himself in the first room he had walked into. Arthur looked at him warily, and even more so when Jon began to run through one room and another until finally stopping. The hole in the floor barely big enough to fit someone, and yet he knew it was there for him. "Down there, Arthur. I need to go down there," he said, and as he looked down, he saw the reflection of the egg in the darkness. Essos 29A6 AZ. Dany. The cages they had made for the dragons were more for them to rest or hide than anything else, and once they left Volantis and were out on the road, she released them. Both Rhaegar and Aegon more than happy to be free to fly, and soon she was laughing as they chased after and caught a bird in the sky. Shiera seemed more subdued, and Sandor was ever watchful, but the road was empty and they rode unbothered. Where they were going, she had no idea. Kinvara giving them the vaguest of directions. They were to head east, and that was it. Nothing more to be said. Looking at the map that Benero had given them, Dinge couldn't see where Aegon and Jon Connington would go. There were cities out there, great cities, and small cities, but why they'd go east made no sense to her. Shiera too didn't seem too happy about it, and despite what she said, Dany knew there was something on her aunt's mind. She was, however, willing to wait until she brought it up with her herself, feeling that she owed her that much. The dragons would come in and rest ever so often. Despite not liking the cages at all, they would accept them, if only briefly. Here, Sandor said as they neared a small stream. It's still early, she said, unhappy. They were stopping. We may not find a place like this for a bit. There'll be fish in the stream, so we and the dragons can eat, he said, and she nodded. She joined Sandor in the water as he began to catch the fish. How he was able to do it was beyond her. Still, she tried to do the same as he, and only ended up getting soaked, not enjoying it when he laughed or splashed her more than once on purpose. Stop it, she said as she spluttered and wiped her face. Stop what? He said with a smirk. You know what, you stupid fucker? She said before she was splashed again. Right, you asked for it, she said, and for the next half hour, they both spent their time just throwing water at each other. Come on, let's eat. I'm fucking starving, Sandor said eventually. You're always starving. You hungry. Demi, she heard the warning tone in Shera's voice, and both of them laughed as they carried the fish over to the fire. She found it almost as appetizing as the dragons did. Aegon and Rio both eating 2 each. Sandor also ate 2, the big hungry fucker that he is, she thought with a giggle. When she woke the next morning, it was to break her fast on more fish, and then to spar with Sandor. Nothing too strenuous, but just enough to keep in shape. Once they were finished, and she'd washed, they were off again, the dragons once again free to fly and happy to do so. It seemed to be endless. They met some people on the road, and yet, for the most part, they traveled alone. What surprised her was both the dragons' growth and that they spent less and less time needing to rest. Not that the cages were any use for them now. They had also moved on to larger prey. Goats, sheep, ground hares, and when they ate birds, one was no longer enough. Each night, though, she'd find herself wrapped up with Aegon, and she'd look to see Shera do the same. She'd talk to her, hear her chirp, and occasionally hear a voice in her head. By the time they passed Mainturus, the dragons were the size of small horses. The flames they could produce were hotter and burned for longer too. She had been looking forward to going into the town itself, thinking if Aegon and Jon Connington were anywhere out here, it would be there. No, we must move forward, Shera said. Why, we could rest in there, a nice bed and a bath they could be in there, aunt. If they are, then they are dead. Trust me, niece, we don't want to be seen here. Especially not with dragons. Shera said firmly, Sandor? She asked, and he nodded. I think Shera is right. It's best we move on. We move on then, she said, glad to see the relieved smile on her aunt's face. Since Volantis, she'd been somewhat more willing to listen and do what others said. Occasionally she'd argue, and sometimes she'd need to bite her tongue, but she'd realize that other people knew more than her. If Sandor said something wasn't safe, then she'd listen. If Shera spoke of a place with more knowledge of it than she, then she really shouldn't argue. As they passed Mainturus, though, she felt a little reluctant. The idea of a warm bath was really appealing, she thought, sighing when the city was out of view. By the time they reached the ruined city of Boris, they'd been traveling for a couple of moons at least. Dany having lost track of how long exactly they'd been out here, instead relying on the fact that the dragons were now almost as big as the horses they rode, and her hair was now long enough that Sandor had stopped calling her a bald fucker. Apparently now she was fuzzy fucker, and he delighted in rubbing his hand on her head and annoying her. Though she quite liked it too at times, not that she'd ever let him know that, annoying fucker that he was. What are you chuckling at? He said as he rode up beside her. Nothing, she said, chuckling more. Come, we need to get dinner, he said, riding away. Jair will be back in a bit, she shouted as she raced after him. They didn't have too far to ride to and found the goats unattended. Taking her bow, she took down the first easily. The second was a little harder, and the last almost got away. The rest of the herd had scattered, and she jumped off her horse, helping Sandor to put 2 in front of him and 1 her, before they rode back. They enjoyed the night as both they and the dragons ate better than they had for a few days. It was a few weeks later when it happened. She'd had a dream that night of a young girl being chased, the men wearing leather and carrying spears. The look of fear on the girl's face woke her up, and as Dainty looked around, she felt they were close. She walked over to the tree. Sandor slept against and woke him up, unsurprisingly finding him in a terrible mood. "What they fuck? We have to go now. She needs us," she said. And he looked at her and then almost panicked. "Shiera?" "No, the girl, please, Sandor. We need to go," she pleaded, and he nodded before grabbing his sword. After waking Shader and once Elegon and Rhaegar took to the air, they began to ride fast. The night sky was clear and the moon full as she rode, and she felt they were close as they came to a hill. She knew it was to be here when they rode over it, though she found that they were alone with no sign of girl anywhere, and she was starting to feel foolish when she heard the scream. Looking around, she saw Elegon and Rhaegar near a small shape on the ground, and she moved quickly to it, seeing the panicked look on the young girl's face. "You have nothing to fear, they won't harm you," she said, and the girl didn't seem to believe her, moving further away from the dragons. Shakal then. "Rosiego, Elegon, Nayod, Nagie, sir." "Rosiego, Elegon, come here," Shader said, and the dragons chirped before flying to her. Donnie looking back to see her aunt stroking each of them and hearing their trills from where she stood. "You are safe. We won't harm you. I promise," she said, and the girl seemed to relax some. This one has never seen such things," the girl said. "They are dragons. What is your name, little one?" Donnie asked, reaching out a hand, which the girl took. "This one is called Missandei," the girl said, with a soft smile on her face. "My name is Daenerys, but my friends call me Daini Missandei." "The Daini," the girl said, smiling more now. "Hi Garden 26 AC. More Jerry." The preparations for Garland's wedding took up some of her time, as did her own studies, and she also tried her best to keep busy. Being with Sansa helped. They'd gone hawking again with her brother, and Sansa had allowed Willis to show what a non-ward could do. While not as successful as Sansa had been while warging, it still was most impressive, and it left the rest of them unable to compete. Her nights, though, were far longer than she wished, and her dreams were not the ones she wanted. Once she'd fully recovered from her illness and felt sure she was strong enough again, she tried to repeat what had happened. While she knew it was unlikely the pin played any part, it was all she knew that had happened differently that day, and so she pricked her finger once again and lay in bed and waited. Sleep came. The dreams, however, did not, and she woke the next morning once again, annoyed and frustrated. So much so that her grandmother practically demanded that she come spend the day with her. It didn't take long for the conversation to happen. She knew it would, and in the end was glad of it, though not so much at the beginning. "This is not like you, Marguerite," her grandmother said as they sat in her solar. "What's not like me?" "This mooning around. I know you're missing Jon, but you've been parted before, and will again." "It's different this time. Harder," she said as she huffed. "Why?" "We're married, grandmother. My husband and I are married, and I've spent only a few hours with him since we were wed," she said, shaking her head. "You shouldn't have married him then, should you?" her grandmother said, and she turned to look at her. "What?" she snapped. "Had you actually given any thought into what you did, had he, then you'd have realized the folly of what you were doing." Margie barely let her grandmother finish, standing up and moving to the room. "Sit down at once, young lady," her grandmother snapped. She glared at her for a moment, but it had no effect on her grandmother. Her stare was far more practiced than her own. So reluctantly, she walked back to her seat and sat down, sighing as she did so. "My sweet child, I don't mean to be so harsh. I know how you both feel about each other. It's why I was so happy when the match was made. So happy for you both," her grandmother said, reaching out and taking her hand in hers. "But I don't," Marjorie said, and Olenna chuckled. "I know you're upset, not so much by missing Jon. Oh, I know you do, but it's also because your brother is to be wed soon, and you can see him having the wedding you did not. That's why I wanted you to wait, sweetling. So when you and Jon were ready, then you too would have that day." We never thought. "I know," her grandmother said, and she chuckled with her this time. Later, as her mother, Sansa, and Mira, along with her cousins, were fitted for their dresses, she felt somewhat better. Even more so, that night at dinner and over the next few days, she pushed herself more and more into her daily activities. Even her nights became better. her dreams returning, and some she'd found to be far more interesting than others. They were in the gardens when the letters arrived, one from Loras and one from Jon, Sansa, looking on excitedly as she watched her take it. She wanted nothing more than to just open it, to tear it open and read it then and there, and yet she also wished to read it alone in her room. So she decided it for the best to read Loras's one out loud and to save Jon's for later, hoping Sansa would understand. Marge! I should be setting off within the moon, unfortunately. Things are quite busy here, and Lord James and Lady Daisy won't be able to attend, so you'll be stuck with just me. I'm afraid I'm looking forward to seeing you all, even if it felt like just yesterday that I was there. Give my best to Mother and Father and to Garland and Willis, and I'll see you and Sansa and all the rest in a moon or so. Loras. She felt both happy and sad at the letter. She had hoped the Lannisters would have come back, that joy would have come at least. Though she knew that after her name day and the tourney that expecting people to come for the wedding also was a bit much. She also felt a little worried, as did Sansa, that Loras didn't mention Jon in his letter. Sansa, would you mind? She said, and Sansa smiled at her, shaking her head, already knowing what she was about to ask. No, I understand. Will you tell me afterward what you can anyway? Sansa asked. I will, she said, and placed the letter in her pocket. She shared Loras's letter with her mother and grandmother and found out they had received a similar one from him and from the Lannisters. Then she spent the whole of the day just waiting for it to be time to retire for the evening. Time seeming to almost crawl, she felt, until she found herself hurrying to her room that night. Once inside, she lay down on her bed and opened the letter, smiling, when she saw the handwriting. My dearest wife, I've been so busy since I came back, have had so much to do, and yet even filling my time can't make up for the fact that I long to be elsewhere, to be with someone else. There are moments throughout the day where I find myself reaching down and touching your favor, or when in my room I find myself holding gifts you've given me. I look at your picture and talk to it and find it a poor substitute for who I wish I was speaking to. Laying in my bed, I think back to a night when I lay beside my wife, when I felt her arms around me and her head on my chest. I wish it was all over, that we were just together and could live our lives, that we could have the future we deserve. I've never wanted the crown as much as I do right now, as I know once I have it, then it's done. I can be with the woman I love, have the life I'm supposed to, and we never need to be parted by anyone's choice but our own. I miss you so much and think of you always, your smile, listening to your voice, and how I feel when I'm with you. My heart no longer is mine and mine alone. It's yours, and I gave it to you freely and without hesitation. Look after it for me until we meet again, and know that until we do, I am less than I wish to be. Only with you am I the man I should be, the man I want to be, the man I could be. I am no longer just Jon because I'm no longer alone. It's not just me or just you. From now on, there is only us. Your husband. Rolling over on her back, she looked at the letter once again, smiling as she wiped her eyes. She leaned forward and placed a kiss on where he'd signed it, and placed it on the table. Holding the pin in her hand, she pricked her finger yet again, and let the blood pool. And closing her eyes, she hoped to see her husband in her dreams that night. Casterly Rock, 296 AC. Tyrion. He waved his uncle off, Jaime standing beside him as the Lion's Mane set out into the bay. And Kevin not wasting any time in setting sail for Myr. As it would take him almost a moon to get there, and who knows how long to negotiate with the Company of the Rose. Tyrion and Harys would take the reins in Lannisport, though Harys would do most of the work as Tyrion had other things in his mind. Trying to figure out just what to tell her, how to even bring it up, was hard enough, and despite all the reassurances, he was still incredibly nervous to do so. He knew he'd fallen for her hard. Everything about her interested him when he was with her. Be it in bed or just speaking to her, the world around him ceased to exist. So much so that Rhaegar got angry with him for not spending enough time with him, actually huffed and refused to speak to him for a day or two. He cursed Jon for not being there with him, as trying to placate an annoyed dragon was so beyond his capability. It was actually Sorella who managed to do so, and when he heard what caused the upset, he both found it funny and it bothered him also. His dragon was jealous, and so to make him less so, Sorella had told him that Arianne would leave soon. While this had made Rhaegar happy, it had the opposite effect on him. You hungry? Jaime asked, and he nodded, both of them walking to the tavern, rather than riding back to the rock. Where do you think they are now? He asked Jaime, as they strolled through the streets. They must have left Highheart Summerhall, maybe. How fast can they travel? Jaime, how fast can they travel? Jaime asked, and Tyrion knew he meant, how fast can a dragon actually fly? I've no idea, But faster than anyone else could, I'd wager, he said, and his brother laughed, though it was a hollow one. He knew Jaime worried, as did he himself, though how anyone could harm Jon on Rhaenys's back, or with Arthur with him, was beyond him. Still, he knew that, as long as Jon was out there, his brother wouldn't relax, and so he hoped they'd return within the time he'd said. After eating, they rode back to Casterly Rock, and he made his way to his solar before sending Satin to find Arianne, the boy coming back and telling him she was her cousin's. He sent her a note asking to meet him on the beach when she was ready, and then prepared himself to tell her the truth. It felt strange to him, his family, Jon, they had been the ones to speak to him of who he was, what he was, while accepting it, still never really said it to anyone. He'd called himself what it made him, and spoken of his fears of what he was, but actually coming out and saying he was Aerys's son. He was a Targaryen. He'd not done yet. In a way, he didn't feel one. He was a Lannister, and had always been a Lannister. His family saw him as a Lannister. Jon had said he was both, and yet, despite feeling the extra kinship with Jon that the blood ties brought, or with Rhaegar, in a way, he still saw himself as only a Lannister. A part of him feared he was about to lose that now that, once he spoke openly the truth, he was about to become something he wasn't sure he wished to be. "My lord, Princess Arianne has headed down to the beach," Satin said, and he nodded. "Where's Bronn?" he asked. "He has given lessons to Walder and Jorah, my lord, Loras and Brienne too." "Very well. Why don't you head down to them, Satin? I won't be needing you for the rest of the day," he said with a smile. "Are you sure, my lord?" "Aye, I'll see you on the morrow." Once Satin had left, he got ready, walking far more slowly to the lift, and taking it down to the vaults. The two guards at the entrance to the rooms nodding to him as he passed. He heard the voices of what he assumed to be Tyee and Serila in one of the rooms, and walked out onto the beach itself. Arianne was standing near the water, and even from here he could see the curves of her body. Her dress was both blowing loose in the wind and molded to her body, and he had to shake the image from his head before he got to her, his mind needing to be focused on what he had to say and do. Once he reached her, she leaned down and kissed him, and he found he couldn't quieten that voice in the back of his head which said it would be the last time she did so. "My lion wished to speak to me," she asked, her voice playful. "I did. Can we sit?" "Of course." They took a seat on a small dune, and he once again took a deep breath, holding it in for some time before he breathed out slowly. "There is something I need to tell you, something I've wanted to tell you since you arrived here," he said. And had he been able to look at her face, he'd have seen the smile on it. "Tell me," she said excitedly. "Do you know of the Maesters? Of what they did, and why Jon did what he did with them?" He asked, catching her by surprise, her tone showing this was not what she'd expected him to say. "I know some. My uncle said it was a conspiracy against the Targaryens," she said, and looked to him to see if she got it right. "It was they wished to wipe the dragons and the Targaryens from the world. They failed," she said with a small laugh. "They did, but to do this, to ensure it was done, they placed maesters everywhere. Sunspear, Casterly Rock, Winterfell, almost every great house, and where they could not, their strongest bannermen, had a maester that belonged to this conspiracy. Here Cracelin played his part," he said almost angrily. "What did he do?" she asked, and he felt her fingers on his face. "My mother," he said, and closed his eyes to compose himself. "My mother's death wasn't an accident. They wished to see her die, her and the babe she carried." "Oh, Tyrion, I'm so sorry," she said, and she took her hand in her own, bringing it to her lips and kissing it. "At first we believed that it was simply to help further antagonize my father. To take away the one person who he'd listened to, the one person he'd not wished to shame. While I was in Essos, though, Jon found out there was more to it. Much more," he said, and he felt his eyes water. "Tyrion? Erasus was a man of many lusts, many desires, being a king. He was used to getting what he wanted, and it didn't matter to him how he achieved that," he said, his breath hitching. "My mother was one of those he lusted after, be it because of herself or that she was Tywin's wife. He wanted her, and no one could stop him." "Tyrion, oh, my lion," she said, as she began to realize. "Tywin Lannister was not my father. Aerys was. I am a child born of—" He never got to finish, both his tears and the embrace she wrapped him up in smothering his words. Instead, he sobbed against her. Perhaps the longest and hardest he'd cried since he'd found out the truth, and for how long he couldn't tell. Arianne, though, held him through it all. Not once did she let go, and when he began to calm down, she wiped his eyes with her handkerchief. "I wanted to tell you when you arrived. Truly I did. But I wished to see you, to be with you. and I didn't want. I hoped I understand that this changes things, he said shakily. What? She asked, confused. It changes things, I know. I'm sorry, Ari, he said, and as she looked at him, he couldn't place her expression. Changes? What changes? I might have feel differently about you over your father. You think Aerys is worse to me than Tywin? She asked almost angrily. After what Tywin did to my family, you think anyone could be worse than he? No. No, Aerys was a madman. He too caused my family great pain and suffering. But it was Tywin Lannister that my father blamed, that my uncle blamed, that I blamed, and yet I am with you despite this. So why would this change things between us? She asked, and he looked to her. She was angry with him, and he wasn't sure why. I am a child born of rape, he said. Yet you are the same man I allowed in my bed last night, and the night before. The same man who moves my heart like no other. Do you really think so? Little of me that you think who your father was matters to me? Is that who you are? Are you with me because my father is the Prince of Dorne? No. Then why would you think that I'm with you, or would not be with you based on who your father is? He realized that then, the anger, it wasn't directed at him over who he was or who his father was. She was angry at him because she thought he was suggesting something he was not. I never thought that, based on you, Ari. I thought it based on me, he said. Explain it to me, she said, her voice almost pleading. All my life I've been what I am, a dwarf, a Lannister. People see me for how they wish, and I knew that, and dealt with it. I was never to be a fit consort for a highborn lady, despite my status, he said, and he raised his hand when she went to speak. And then I met a beautiful princess who didn't seem to care, he said. I don't, she said determinedly. But you too knew me for who you thought I was, and now I find that is a lie. I'm not that man. I'm someone else. So you worried I'd reject you. I did. Not because of you, Ari, because of me. Because of how I felt all my life. Because of how I feel about you. How do you feel about me? She asked, the excitement back in her voice now. I love you, he said, looking down at the sand. Good. I love you too. My lion, or is it my dragon now? She said, and when he looked back up at her and saw the smile on her face, he found he didn't care. He wished for nothing more than to just ravish her there and then, and he could see that she too was eager. But there was something else he needed to do, so he stood up and reached out his hand to help her up. Once she was they began to walk to the cave. Rhaegar was awake, and Tyrion wondered if the dragon had felt his emotions. Was he the same as Rhaenys was with Jon in that regard? Though that was truly a matter for another time, he walked over and leaned in and felt the dragon's joy at both his presence and the calm that was in his heart now. This is Rhaegar, my dragon, he said as Arianne gasped. Isis 2096 AC. Sandor. The girl was a slave and a runaway, and according to Dany and the girl herself, there could be people coming after her. Sandor found that abhorrent. That a girl this age was a slave was not expected. This whole place ran on slaves. The reason that she'd run those sickened him, and he hoped the people who owned her turned up. He prayed for it, really. Once she'd calmed down and eaten, the girl, Miss Andy, told him that she belonged to a man named Krasny's Monaklos, one of the good masters of Astapor. She was a scribe used to translate for the master and to help him sell the Unsullied to those who spoke different languages. They'd been visiting Meereen, and one of the great masters had taken a liking to her, and she'd overheard Krasny's agree to sell her to him. What the man wished to do to her sickened him, and even as beaten down as Missandei was, she had run and run far. Is she asleep? He asked when Shira came and sat beside him. She is. Dainty is next to her. Good. They will come on the morrow, he said, and she nodded. The Unsullied are formidable, Sandor. If they send enough, we don't stand a chance. Shatter said worriedly, You, Dany, and Miss Andy can hide among the rocks there. Dany, with her bow, can take out some, and I can handle the rest. The dragons will help too, she said, and he nodded. Go get some sleep, I'll keep watch, he said, and she stood up and placed his hand on his shoulder. Be safe, she said softly. He saw them in the distance the next morning, a dozen men carrying spears and one on a horse. They were moving fast, and he knew it would only take an hour or so before they reached them. Waking up the girls, he hated the look of fear on Miss Andy's face. No girl of that age should ever feel that way, he thought, and resolved to take that fear away. Sending Dany to the rocks, he told her to wait for his single and then Aegon and Rhaegal took to the sky, both dragons ready, if needed, and so they waited for the men to come closer. When they arrived, he saw them more clearly now, and he felt the doubt begin to rise. There was more than he thought, 20 not counting the man on the horse, and the odds were way against him. Dany could take a few, and he a few more, and he hoped the dragons could take the rest. Closing his eyes, he stood firm, and waited for someone to speak. He didn't speak the broken Valyrian that most spoke in Essos, knowing only some words, and so, after the man had spoken for a few minutes, he chuckled, having understood none of it. "What the fuck did you just say?" he said, laughing. "Girl, come this way. You give." The man said then, in the common tongue, broken though it was. "Fuck off," he said, and watched as the man took the small whip in his hand and moved it, the Unsullied raising their spears. "You give or you die," the man said, and before Sandor could move, the arrow flew, catching the man in his throat. He reached down for his sword at the same time as the screeches of the dragons began. The noise of the man falling to the ground lost among the other sounds. The Unsullied had formed into a group, their spears out and the formation impenetrable, and he hoped the dragons could do what he could not. "Masador, Marsalian, Iragan Ilagan, Masador, Marsalian, stand down," he heard Missandei say as she and Dan moved out from the rocks. He cursed them both. Shat, too, when she moved also, and was thankful that Dany at least still had her bow trained on the men. Missandei walked over to the man on the ground, and he stiffened when she got close to the Unsullied, though no man moved to stop her or grab her. Instead, she bent down and picked up the small whip and brought it to Dany, handing it to her and nodding. "Dorvojai Giyoragan Ilagan." Unsullied stand down. Dany said, and yet no one moved. "Drakar Zalagan," Dany said, and the flames lit up the sky. "Drakar is Rhaegar," Shiera said a moment later, and the green dragon did just as his sister had. "Gazaba Gedi Oregon, Ilagan." Unsullied stand down. Dany said once again, "Masador, Marcelin, you, Hiuragan, Ilagan, Ryogagan, Costilus." "Masador, Marcelin, stand down. Listen, please," Missandei said, and Sandor relaxed, seeing them lower their shields. "Missaintu Iaxis, Dias Costa Umbagon, Leda Ziriel." Missaintu is free, you can stay with her. Dany said Aya, Costa Jikagon, Arli Nayat, Sayexia, Mike, Epagon Onayat, Idet Epagon. "Or you can go back to the masters, I ask you to choose." "Umbegon, stay," one of the Unsullied said. "Magagwan," another quickly added. "Umbagan," the rest said as one. He watched as Dany stepped forward, the whip in her hand and her bow on her back. She threw the whip down a few feet from the Unsullied, and Elegon flew close to it. "Trocaris Elegon," she said, and the whip was then covered in flame. "Hinbiza tubis ixa dies vali, auha theas ixes auhan sa auhan meri." From this day you are free men, your fate is yours, and yours alone. Dany said, and even Sandor was moved by the powerful way she said so. Masador and Marcelin, it turned out, were Missandei's brothers, and the leader of the group was a man named Grey Worm. Missandei having explained to them how the names of the Unsullied were chosen and how they were changed regularly. Missandei feeling a chill run down his spine at that thought for some reason. You were who you were, having someone else tell you that you were not, disturbed him. They ate horse that night Missandei couldn't ride, and the Unsullied were foot soldiers, and so they killed the horse and shared it amongst themselves. The dragons flying off to hunt their own food. With Meereen and Slaver's Bay out of the question now, they headed north towards the Dothraki Sea, Sandor feeling more comfortable with the escort they had with them. Missandei sat in front of Daenerys on her horse, he and Shiera on theirs, and behind them the 20 Unsullied marched, the dragons flying ahead of them. They would keep close to the river for now, though soon they'd be leaving it behind, and yet Sandor couldn't help but feel they were traveling in the wrong direction. Summer Hall 2096 AC. Arthur. The tale that Jay had told him disturbed him for a few reasons. Not only did it sound crazy, mad, and that would have been enough, but how he spoke of it reminded him far too much of his father. His initial observations of his king were that he was both his parents, Rhaegar's seriousness, and Lyanna's ability to have fun on some occasions, though he showed what, to Arthur, were some of Rhaegar's worst traits. At times he could seem obsessive, driven, only not in the direction he would prefer him to be focused on. Instead, like his father, it was prophecy, and things that Arthur didn't understand that James' mind would turn to, Were it not for James Hallweiss and Walder, or for what he'd seen James Hall do himself, then he may have found himself doubting him far more than he did. Yet still, at times, he found the doubt to be almost overwhelming, almost threatening to be the only thing on his mind. Listening to him speak of what he and Maya Rivers had spoken of, seeing him collapse in the middle of the ruined hall and then watching him frantically run and point to a hole in the ground, his doubt was once again threatening to make his choices for him. In the end, he was glad it did not, sitting with J.A. around the fire and looking at the eggs. He couldn't believe it, and he dared not imagine what was in the chest. "How do you think you're to open that, J.A.?" he asked, as J.A. looked at the chest. "It's not to be opened here, Arthur," Jack said confidently. "How do you know?" he asked. "I feel it. This is not the place. The magic's not right," Jane said as he held one of the eggs in his hand. "And them?" he asked, pointing to the 3 eggs. "They live, Arthur, but they are not for me," Jane said and moved over to him, allowing him to touch the egg. He felt the heat, but it was cooler, easier for him to touch, and the life that moved inside it was duller, lesser in some way. As he watched Jade put the scarlet egg beside the others, the bright blue and the deep indigo, he wondered who they were for, if not his king. He didn't need to wait too long for the answers. "They are for who follows Arthur, my children, my children's children. I do not know which, but I know they belong to them. I can feel them in my head, whispering, 'Not yet, not yet.'" Jack smiled. "How did you know about them?" He told him then about what he'd seen and done, and Arthur once again found the whole thing to be mad, crazy, and when Jay laughed, he began to worry a little. "I know what you're thinking, Arthur, and I'm glad for it. Truly, you need to be wary, Yatse, Tyrion, we all do, but this thing, it's not madness. Arthur, I see that now. It's a gift," Jade said, and Arthur looked at him confusedly. "Jane? I saw my grandmother, Arthur. I felt her hand against my face, just as I did Rhaenys' hand many years ago. I've seen my mother, my father, my brother, and other mother. It's not the same as if they were here with me, but I've seen them. How can that not be a gift?" G.A. said, with a soft smile on his face. When darkness came, he joined Jane seated on Rhaenys' back. The dragon pleased to leave as much as he was, though he wondered if she was as nervous of their destination as Jay or him. Way too soon, he saw the red mountains beneath him, and then the prince's pass, before finally he saw it in the distance. They landed in the mountains, though, Rhaenys seeing a herd of goats and a cave, and taking full advantage of both. He and Jess, too, ate goat that morning, and as Rhaenys slept in the cave, Jay hid the eggs behind her, but when they left, he carried the chest with him. It took them almost 3 hours to walk the distance to the tower itself. He and Jay alternating between carrying the chest, Arthur found himself surprised by the lightness of it. When they finally reached the outskirts of the tower and he could see the graves in the distance, he needed to stop. "Are you well?" Jay asked. "A moment, my king," he said, before composing himself and walking forward. Tower of Joy 2096 AC, Jaehaerys Targaryen. They stopped at the graves and both he and Arthur paid their respects. Arthur showing him which was Gerald's and which belonged to Oswald. J.A. thanked them for what they'd tried to do for him and hoped they'd found peace in the next world. He told Arthur that he would see the remains brought back to the Red Keep when he was crowned. See them buried beside their brothers, as all fallen Kingsguard should be. Arthur insisted on checking the tower first, making sure it was empty before he went inside, and he allowed him taking a seat at the bottom and looking at the chest in his hands. Whatever was in it would be opened here. He felt it, knew it, and he could feel a sense of excitement at the thoughts of it. This was for him. It was always supposed to be for him. When Arthur came down and said it was safe to go forward, Jay asked to go alone. He needed to see it for himself, to experience it alone, and he felt close to breaking down as it was. Arthur was already worried enough about him as it was. Should he see that too, then Jay shuddered to think what he'd feel. Reluctantly, he allowed him to go alone, and so he walked up the stairs slowly, reaching the door and opening it with his heart in his mouth. The woman was laughing and japing, running as she was chased by a silver-haired man, their voices echoing throughout the tower. At the table sat an older fair-haired man wearing armor, his expression playful, though his voice was grumpy as he complained. In the corner stood Arthur, younger and happier than he'd ever seen him. The woman hiding behind the two knights, first Oswald and then Arthur, the man laughing as he moved towards her. "Sir Arthur, your prince commands you to move," his father said, his voice light. "I cannot, my prince. My princess requires my protection." Arthur said as behind him his mother stuck her tongue out. Abandoned by mine own Kingsguard, a poor prince am I, his father said with a chuckle. It's your own fault, Rache, I warned you what would happen, his mother said. That you did, my love, very well. I concede you win, his father said. You should get used to it, my love, his mother said as his father and both knights laughed. He moved further into the tower, the steps leading up calling to him, and soon he came to a room he dared not but knew he must enter. Opening the door, he prepared himself for what he may see, and then he walked inside. They lay on the bed, her head laying on his father's chest, his father's fingers brushing through her hair. Both of them were completely at ease, fully relaxed, as if they didn't have a care in the world. They spoke, laughed, kissed, and lay just comfortable with each other. The tears were in his eyes when he opened them. The room blurry because of it, but he could see what he needed to see. The sheets had been removed. The mattress, though, had not. And as he moved around the room, he began to see other things. Little drawings carved into the wall. A small wolf cub, a man, a woman, and a babe, a young boy. He brushed his fingers over them and knelt down to look more closely, seeing it then out of the corner of his eye. It must have been kicked under at some time, the small wooden figure leaning against one of the legs of the bed. Placing the chest on the ground, he squeezed underneath, and finally was able to reach it. The wooden wolf was small and white. Where they'd managed to find a piece of weirwood he had no idea. But as he looked at it, as he saw the red eyes, he began to cry, fully now. How long he lay there under the bed, he knew not. Eventually, though, he squeezed back out and stood up. Reaching down to his belt, he took the knife and began to cut the blood-stained mattress, grabbing a piece before walking back to the chest and picking it up. He walked to the door and stood there for a few more moments. Closing his eyes, he was happy to see the image of his father and mother laying happy together, and then he left without looking back. Did you find what you need? Arthur asked, and Jay could see that the knight was still a little upset by the place they were in. I did. I need a flame, Arthur, he said. And Arthur nodded, grabbing some wood and some taking out his flint. While Arthur lit the wood, Jax placed the chest on the ground on top of the blood-stained piece of the mattress. Taking his knife out once again, he cut his palm and let the blood drip over the chest, before tying the wound off with a handkerchief. Arthur walked over with the piece of burning wood, and he took it off him. Leaning down, he held it to the mattress and watched as it caught fire. Now we wait, he said. And Arthur nodded. The mattress, the blood, the chest, all of it, or none of it, he wasn't sure. But the flames rose far bigger than they had any right to. They burned far brighter than they should, and then they were gone. The mattress had burned away to nothing, but the chest itself was unburnt. Did it not work? Arthur asked. It worked, he said as he moved forward and opened the chest. He reached in and took out a small pendant, the three-headed dragon wrought in gold and rubies, though it was the other item his hands moved to quickly. Is that? Arthur said as Jay held it in his hand. The crown of the Conqueror. Jack said as he held the Valyrian steel circlet in his hands. My name is Jacaerys, Targaryen, and this is my crown. Mirror 2096, Kevin. The lion's mane pulled into the dock smoothly. Kevin standing on the deck and looking at the marish buildings in the distance. They had made more than good time, less than a moon, and he was eager to meet these northern sellswords. His men had been butchered. Westerland's men, Northmen, and men hired in Essos, butchered and left to die. Barely a few had lived, and those who had would never work again. Kevin ensuring they and their families were well looked after. The gold he spent out to help the families of those who fell was a lot, and he cared nothing about it. The gold he'd spend on these sellswords he cared just as little for. It was justice he sought, vengeance he would buy, and he would see every last man who'd played a part in that attack dead. He and Sir Adam, along with a dozen of his best knights, walked from the ship and readied themselves to meet with a local magister that they had dealings with. While not having an office in Mer, they did have a man they could call on, and so they made their way to the manse of Magister Warlus, the younger magister having been the one who'd been most eager to do business with them. They soon arrived, and while it was lavish, it was not as large as some of those around it. My friend, it's good to see you in person, finally. Orzi said, and Kevin smiled and nodded. You too, Magister. Is there somewhere we can speak? He asked, and the Magister nodded. Servants leading the way to where food and drink were already laid out. What brings you to Mer, Lord Kevin? You heard of what happened in Loreth Norvos? He asked, taking a swallow of the offered wine. Bandits, my lord. The bane of our existence. Surely not enough to bring you here, Orlus asked inquisitively. More than bandits, my friend. A collected effort to interrupt our trading. Should they not be dealt with then, even here, we may have difficulties. Kevin said, and saw Orlas nod in agreement. You seek to end these difficulties before they stretch further? I do. The Company of the Rose is nearby. Is it not? I seek an audience with their commanders. Can it be arranged? Of course. I'll see it done at once, Wyatt said. I'll see you rewarded, of course. Kevin said, and Orlas shook his head. There is no need, my lord. Our business together is most profitable, though perhaps some extra shipments could be sent. Ozielos asked, I'll see to it, and your own percentages. Magister. A 5% rise on this, and our increased business, Kevin said. And the Magister smiled broadly. You are too kind, my lord. Far too kind. Truthfully, he was being overly generous. The increased business alone should make the Magister even more gold. But Kevin had learned one thing about the men of Essos. They were a greedy bunch. Far better to keep them well rewarded before they sought it than after they looked for it. He figured loyalty could be bought, but once lost, it was hard to regain. It took them a couple of days to be given the go-ahead to travel to the company's headquarters. They were housed in a rather small barracks outside of Myr, but very well defended and manned, and as he ate him and the others rode up, he could see the Northmen look warily in his direction. They were stopped at the gate by a large man, and Kevin judged him to be of a size with the Hound, the Mountain even, the large halberd on the man's back, and his size were enough to dissuade most, he thought. Who are you? The gruff voice asked, half northern and half Isseos. I am Lord Kevin Lannister. I've come to meet with Torrhen Snow. Very well. You're expected. You and one man, the others wait here. Kevin nodded to Adam, and they both rode in. They were directed to a small building at the back, and he saw two more large men standing in front of it. Once they dismounted, they were led inside to a large room, and found 4 men sitting at the table. Just like those they'd seen so far, they were all large men, one with an eye patch, one with scars, and 2 who just stared angrily at them. Take a seat, bread and salt, the largest of the men said, moving the plate towards them. I will accept guest rights, he said, and saw some nods. Once they had taken a piece of each, a young lad brought in some ale, which they accepted, and some food which they took only to be polite. After they'd eaten a little and drank some more, the same large man looked at them and began to speak. Lord Kevin Lannister, and who be you? He said, looking to Adam. His voice had no trace of a Fozy and was full Northman. Serdam Robert Adam said, What brings a lion and a burning tree to my house? The man asked. You're Torrhen Snow. Kevin asked. I am. This is Ardos and Brandon Snow, and the quiet lad is Hugo. Torrhen said, You know of our business in Essos? Kevin asked. We know, Ardos said. Some of our shipments were recently attacked, made to look like bandits, though it wasn't bandits who did it. What know you of the brave companions? That they're not very fucking brave, Brandon Snow said to Lass. We know of hopes, and I'm sorry for your men, but what's this got to do with us? Torrhen said. I'd like to hire the company to track down the brave companions and bring them the justice they deserve. Kevin said. No. Torrhen said as he and the others got up and turned to walk from the room. Have you heard of Jon Snow? Kevin said, and they stopped, Torrhen looking at him. Eddard Stark's bastard son. Even over here we've heard of events in the north. Torrhen said, Our trade, our ships, while my nephews and I have played our part, a lot of it is down to Jon Snow. He was my nephew's squire. He's a knight in his own right now. But ever since he came to us, he's been the driving force behind our trade. The ships were his idea. He said, and while the other 3 men looked ready to leave, Torrhen looked at him for a moment, and then they all sat down. And I'm most pleased for the lad, but again, of what import is this to us? Torrhen asked. It's not just our trade that Jon has seen improve. It's the North's too. Our largest trading partner is House Manderly, House Mormont too. It's not just Westerlands, leaves, or livelihoods. The brave companions killed or threatened. It's northern ones too, Kevin said. There was quietness in the room for some time, the 3 men looking to Torrhen Snow, who in turn looked to him. After what felt like an age, he saw the large man nod and smile, and then looked to the others who did likewise. Very well, the brave companions are no friends of ours, no friends of the North. Given what you say, it's clear you are. So we'll accept your contract, Torrhen said. All of them? Kevin asked. All of them, Torrhen said and spat in his hand. Kevin did likewise, and they shook hands. The gold he brought with him was just a deposit, a retainer of sorts. They'd get the full amount when the job was done. When he spoke to Orles later that night, the man was almost giddy that he'd managed to bring them on board, the threat to their caravans no longer something to be concerned about. Orles said, for Kevin it was just knowing that the men who had carried out the attack would pay. He'd leave it to Jaime and Tyrion to see the man who'd ordered it did likewise. Riverlands 2096 AC. Cat. The new Meister, while not as clever as the man had been, was at least honest. Someone she could be sure wouldn't steal from them. Not that she'd allow a Meister the opportunity to do so ever again. She and Utherides having taken over the finances and running of the keep, they needed to make changes. Some which Admir had fought her on, but the precariousness of their position had become clear even to her brother. Not that he'd completely reined in his spending, and that he was spending mainly on whores was both shameful and, in a way, comforting to her. The lack of prospective brides for her brother showed her how much her house had fallen and how safe her own position within it was, so she allowed him to indulge. Far better he frequented whores than brought home a bastard, she thought. As for their bannermen, it was an uneasy truce. Relationships were still strained with some, broken completely with others, and it had led to her contemplating certain things. The one consistent offer of marriage Admir did get came unsurprisingly from House Frey. The amount offered as a dowry kept rising, and she was almost tempted to accept it. Should she be able to convince her brother, then she probably would. She could limit the power of a woman from House Frey, see that her own position wasn't taken by the new lady, something she couldn't be certain she could manage with any other house, even those houses smaller than the Freys. She knew how Walder treated his brood, how browbeaten the women were, but it was really pointless to think on. Edmure would never accept a Frey for his bride. His own sense of self-importance was far too big for that. Pearl, take this to Utherides, she said, handing the girl the notes she'd made. At once, milady, the young girl said, rushing from the room. Once she'd gone, she reached down to the drawer and took out the letter from her uncle, one of the few bright spots she'd had these last few moons. She smiled as she read it once again. Paedir having come through for her, and she so wished he'd return soon, so she could thank him. Cat, I write to inform you that Brandon is settling in well at the Bloody Gate. He's doing well in his duties and his studies, and I am most pleased to have him as my squire. I'll see that he writes you himself next time. Brundon. She would have preferred a more friendly letter, but her uncle, it seemed, had not come around to her way of thinking. That he and Edmure had a falling out too had left him even more estranged than he had already been. A letter from Brandon would be nice also, she thought. It still bothered her that none of her children, barring Arya and Robb, had actually written to her in some time. The last two letters she had gotten from them had ended up disturbing her for different reasons. Rhaegar to tell her she'd be fostering in Bear Island, which, though was not news, was something she had hoped would never come to pass. As for Robb, his letter should have filled her heart with joy. Her firstborn was to be wed, yet she still felt he was being sold short and still couldn't put it out of her mind that this was the bastard's plan. Mother, it is with great happiness I write to tell you that Lord Wyke's father have agreed to a betrothal between myself and Lady Winifred. The marriage is set to take place in 2 years, and it would mean the world to me if you could attend. I am happy, Mother, blissfully so. I hope the news finds you likewise. Your loving son, Robb. While she wasn't best pleased by the match, feeling the princess or Lady Margaret to be a far better one for the heir to Winterfell, the last part of the letter always made her smile. It was as she was rereading this part that Maester Farman came into the room carrying a much different letter. My lady, a letter from Winterfell, the Maester said, and Kat smiled, wondering who of her children had sent it, thinking it must have been sent before they'd left. The smile was quickly removed from her face, both by the seal, Ned's Lord of Winterfell's seal, and the contents which she couldn't believe as she read them. Catelyn, I write to you to formalize what we both know is the truth of things, the dissolution of our marriage. I've also written to the King and the High Septon. In my letters to them, as I do now to you, I make it clear that our children are unremoved in the line of succession to Winterfell, and are true and good. No children I have from this point forward may interfere with that line no matter what. It's time to move forward with our lives, to end this marriage once and for all. Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, and Warden of the North. She found it hard to breathe. The Maester looking worriedly at her and grabbing her a mug of water which she quickly drank down. It didn't have any effect and she needed another and finally a small dose of dream wine to help her calm down. When she woke later on, for the briefest moment, she thought she'd had a terrible dream. Some nightmare, and she didn't even realize that she was in River Run. Turning to the shadow by her bed, she smiled. Ned, she said, only for Edmure to move from the darkness. Cat, are you well? Do you feel well? The Maester. Shall I send for the Maester? Edmure asked worriedly. No, I'm well. You heard. I did. Give me the word, Cat. Give me the word and I'll call the banners. I'll fucking march to Winterfell and kill him where he sits for this insult. Edmure, she said, shaking her head. No, Cat, it's that woman, that Cerwyn woman he wishes to wed her, to dishonor you, and wed another. I'll not stand for it. We cannot do anything, Edmure. Not yet, she said, and Edmure looked at her. Not yet? No, we must build ourselves back up. We must be ready for when the chance comes, brother, she said, and he nodded. What of the letter? Edmure asked. He's made his bed. Let him lie in it. Besides, if he wishes to wed, then he won't be the only one. Cat. What? Oh, don't mind me, Edmure. I'm just thinking aloud, she said, and Edmure thankfully didn't pay too much heed to her words. She began to consider, though. It was clear to her now that she and Ned were done. That small hope she had held at the back of her mind was now gone. It was for certain now that he would not be coming to his senses and realize just how foolish he had been. Which left her where exactly? Lady of River Run was only temporary, and even as such, she'd never be able to make them pay, not Ned and not the bastard. She needed to rise. To be more, a set-aside woman could only rise so far. And an old marriage, though, should it be granted, it gave her more options. To some it would be shameful, but then again, she was being set aside by a savage, by a heathen. She could use this. With the right amount of thought, she could use this to her advantage. Edmure, could you have Pearl bring me some parchment and a quill? I have letters I must write. Cat, are you sure you're well? Her brother asked as he stood up. I am Edmure, you're right, this is Ned's fault. We'll see him pay for it, she said, and her brother nodded. Casterly Rock 29-6, AC. Arianne. With Tyrion busy with his work, she, Tyrion, and Sarella spent the day on the beach. Sarella wishing to be close to the dragon, and Arianne and Tyrion eager to spend some time with their cousin before they left. Something which was coming up far sooner than she wished. She could only put it off for so long, though, and she knew her father would be getting anxious for her to return. Tian too wished to go home, to be with her other sisters once again, to see her father and be back in Dorne. Her cousin had not enjoyed her time in the West as much as Arianne had. She found herself smirking at that. Her cousin needed to get herself a lion, preferable one as hungry and insatiable as her own was. She wondered how she'd manage without him once she returned to Dorne. How quickly could he get away to come and visit her? That he had promised. Though given how busy he was, and that he said that soon he'd need to fly on the dragon, she wondered just how soon it could be. I'll fly to you then, the voice said in the air, and she smiled once again. His family she had gotten along with far better than she could have hoped. Jaime and his wife had treated her as one of the family. Spending time with them and their babe had been fun for her, something that reminded her that people were the same, be it in Dorne or here in the West. His little cousins were interesting, especially the little girl who was so close to her own cousin. Lady Jaina, too, had been a surprise to her, the woman basically pulling her to one side to warn her what would happen should she hurt her nephew, and doing so in a way which Arianne had found endearing. She was not one usually for tea, but being invited to one by Tyrion's aunt was an offer she couldn't refuse. It must be a change of pace, princess, running Dorne and then coming here. Jaina asked, pouring the cup of the tea. My father runs Dorne, my lady. Call me Jaina, Jaina said, handing her the cup. Arianne, Jaina, she said, and the woman nodded. I know your father runs the country, Arianne, but even here in the West we know that you play a far larger part than most ladies do. Jaina said, offering her one of the sweet cakes. I am heir to my father, Jaina. It's only right that I gain some experience in his duties, is it not? She asked. Indeed, it is. Which is why I was saying being here, doing nothing, of the same import as you do, back in Dorne. That is, it must be what's the word. Jaina paused. Freeing Jaina, she said, and the woman laughed. Freeing? Yes, the thing with freedom. Arianne, is it makes us believe we can do what we wish and face no consequences. We believe we can do what only pleases us, and that no one else matters. Jaina said, sipping her tea. For some, yes. For others, it's the freedom to be who we wish to be with who we wish to be, she said, realizing what Jenny was hinting at. Of course, but what happens when we're no longer free, when we must make more measured choices? Depending on the circumstances, gaining some choices work as well. Free or measured, do they not? For example, a son of a great house is a son of great house. Free, or measured choices, that remains a fact, does it not? She said, looking at the older woman. It does? Then what you wish from your freedom need not be given up in such a case, she said, and Jenna smiled. Indeed not. And would your father feel the same? Jenna asked, taking another sip of the tea. My father wishes me happy and well-matched Genny he may get his wish, she said, and Genny smiled, even more. Well-matched indeed, Jane sir. And this time, Arianne was the one with the smile on her face. She had understood Lady Jaina's game, and while she'd not come out and actually threatened her, the threat was implicit. Had Arianne's answers not impressed the woman, then she felt it would have been far more explicitly expressed. That this was before the revelation of who Tyrion really was, only ended up in it being reinforced. He was a good match as a Lannister. As a Targaryen, he was an even better one. As a dragon rider, then apart from Jon Snow, he was the very best anyone could wish for. He had confided in her that both he and his brother were essentially serving as Jon's hands, that his nephew, and he considered Jon such, was involving him more and more in things, and she could see his pride at that. Her own too rose, both at her cousin for seeing beyond what others saw with Tyrion, and that Tyrion was rising to where he should be. Again, Tydier huffed. What? She said, turning. You're daydreaming about him again, God's Ari, just how good in bed is he? Taney asked, shaking her head. You'll never know, cousin. He's all mine, she said, laughing. Later that night, she rolled over on her side, the sweat running down her back, and her hand barely able to reach over to grab the glass on the table. Beside her, Tyrion, too, looked almost ready to collapse. Their passions had increased. The closer it came to saying goodbye, both of them eager to get in as much as they could before she had to leave, wearing each other out, becoming a nightly, and a couple of times, daily occurrence. Wine? She asked, and smirked when he nodded, unable to speak for a moment. I think we should fly away together, Tyrion said as he drained the glass of wine and handed the empty one back, eager for another. You've not flown yet, she said as she filled it for him. Him a quick study, we just jump on Lygaren's back, and off we go. Anywhere you name the place, and that's where we'll stop. Or we could just speak to my father, she said, and watched the smile fall from his face. Tyrion, you are a Lannister. That alone makes you a worthy match, and Oberyn would speak for you. Arry, were it not that, then there is who you really are. A prince of Targaryen blood, a future dragon rider, uncle to the king. Tyrion, my father, is not a foolish man. Do you want me? She asked, rolling over onto her stomach. Only you, he said, and she was kissing him almost before he finished. Then come to Dorne. Come and fight for me, my lion, she said, once she was finished. I'll come when I can. Soon, I promise, he said, and she smiled before kissing him again. 3 days later, she stood by the dockside in Lannisport. Cammy and Tyrion had come to wave them off. Sorella had too, and both she and Targaryen had said their goodbyes to their cousin, both in private and here in public. That Jon Snow hadn't arrived back she understood, Tyrion having made it clear where he had gone and why, but still she would have liked to have spent more time with her cousin. Lord Yak Weiss, wish to thank you for the welcome and hospitality you and your family have shown to me while I was here. You've made a friend in me, my lord. I hope to be able to repay you in the future. She said genuinely. There is no need, princess. Any member of your family is more than welcome in Casterly Rock or the West. Please give my regards to your father and uncle, Jaime said. I will, my lord. Princes, Arianne, Lord Tyrion. The two of them looked at each other, and then she knelt down and embraced him. That people were looking on, she cared not, the kiss she gave him, leaving any who watched in no doubt of how she truly felt. I await you in Dorne, my lord. Do not leave me waiting long, she said, smiling. I will, my princess, Tyrion said. As the ship sailed from the docks, she stood and watched until they were no longer in view. Once she could see them no more, she walked down to her cabin and lay down on her bed, the tears coming quick and fast, and she felt silly for them, and yet in her heart she felt the loss, as if it was real, as if she was leaving part of herself in the West. She hoped it would not be there for too long, that soon he'd come to Dorne, and she would be whole again. The Great Grass say 2996 AC. Denny. Being with Missy was different. With Sandor, he was like the older brother. They had fun, and he allowed her to be a young girl. But there was always that small bit of distance, age, the fact he was a man, other things. With Shiera, it was who she was, her aunt, and almost a mother figure to her. Shiera taught her how to be a woman, and Dany was able to go to her about the things she'd never speak to Sandor about. Missy, though much younger than her, was a friend. They could have fun together, and she could be the one that Missy sought advice from. It had only taken them days riding together on the horse to grow closer. They weren't Daenerys and Missandei. It was Dandy and Missy. The younger girl, too, enjoyed the notion of a friend, of someone who didn't order her to do things and who asked her what it was she wanted. While the girl was still reluctant at times, she had already come on greatly, Dany felt, and they would laugh and giggle together, annoying Sandor immensely as they rode. At night, Missy would tell them more about the lands they traveled and the Dothraki who roamed it freely, the girl knowing even more of the lands than Shiera seemed to. When a Khal's life dies, she's taken to Vad's Dothrak and becomes a member of the Dosh Khaleen. Missy said as they rode through the grass. The Dosh Khaleen? She asked. The wives of the fallen Khals. What if they don't want to go? She asked, and Missy shook her head. I do not know, Dany, she said, and Dany chuckled sometimes when she said her name. Missy would quickly glance at her to see it was all right that she did so. While she knew it was because of her slave status, it had become a game with them, Dany trying to catch her as she did so. They had been riding for almost a moon since they'd met up with Missy, and the Unsullied had joined them. Some had changed their names, others had gone back to their original ones like Missy's brothers, only Grey Worm keeping the name he'd been given. This one keeps the name as it was the name he was given when the princess freed him. Grey Worm told them one night. She had tried to tell them that it wasn't just her. It was Sandor and Shiera and Missy too. But the Unsullied looked to her, and Shiera had told her it was because she had burned the whip. Dany wasn't sure she truly understood it, but she accepted it. Sandor saying these men offered them protection, that the more they had with them, the safer they were, and she did understand that. They were riding one morning when they saw the dust trail in the distance. The horses riding fast, and there were many of them. They were out in the open and couldn't run. Not only did they not have the horses to do so, but even had they, outrunning Dothraki was beyond them. Dany looked to Shea, and they called for the dragons. Elegon and Rhaegar were off flying some miles ahead of them, but they came back quickly. Stay behind me, Missy, she said to the worried girl, and watched as Sandor and the Unsullied formed a protective ring around them. It was soon clear, though, that it wouldn't be enough. The sheer number of the Khalasar was far beyond anything they could match. When the horses surrounded them, Dainsy looked at the ones in the lead. The Khalasar and his blood riders, Missy had said. She watched as Sandor gripped his sword. Then she leaned back and grabbed her bow, stopping when a huge man jumped from the horse. The man said nothing, just walked to the Unsullied and nodded, looking over their shoulders at her and Missy on the horse. Before he could say anything, the dragons came, their screeches in the air, forcing the man to look up. The horses becoming panicked, the man was not, and he looked up at the dragons and smiled before he began speaking in some guttural language. She didn't understand. I am not here to attack or take from you, Missy said, interpreting his words. We offer you food and drink to share in our bounty. You have the word of Khal Drogo that none of you will be harmed. Ask him why he would offer us this. Dany said, and Missy spoke to the man in the same language he did before he spoke back. He says he has an offer for the silver hair. For you, princess, she said, and she looked to see Khal Drogo staring at her. Turning, she saw both Sandor and Shiera nod. The offer was not one she could not accept. She knew, so she had Missy tell him she agreed, and the Dothraki began to set up tents. Elegon and Rhaegar landed and looked warily at the men. And Dany was surprised when some women came over leading some men who were carrying meat for the dragons. After Shiera had looked at it, and Sandor had too, the Unsullied took it and brought it to the dragons, both of them burning it quickly and eating it almost as fast. They had grown even more, and she wondered if they'd soon be ready to ride. Shiera said no, but she felt they would. The women directed her, Missy and Shiera, to a tent, and there was water and clean clothing laid out for them. Tell the Khal we are grateful, she said, and Missy spoke the words to the women. It felt strange wearing the clothing and seeing both Missy and Shiera in. It was just as odd, but they were welcome, and the food they were given was much appreciated, even if it was mainly horse, as Sandor groused. At one point she found the Khal staring at her, his looks making her uncomfortable, and yet not. During the night, he spoke very little, and it was only the next day that he told her what he wished. They were brought into a large tent. Sandor going in first and finding the Khal sitting alone. He asked for her to come in alone, and while Sandor and Shiera said she shouldn't, she decided she should. Though Missy accompanied her so she could understand what the Khal may say. I am Khal Drogo, son of Khal Barbo, the great rider, the great Khal, Missy said, interpreting him once again. I am Daenerys Stormborn, daughter of Rhaegar Targaryen, she said, refusing to say her father's name and waiting until Missy had finished speaking before continuing. What does the Khal wish of me? She asked, and Missy related to the Khal. I am to be the Khal of Khals, the father of the stallion that mounts the world, to be that I need a Khaleesi worthy of the honor. Long have I searched, and yet I sit here alone and without my Khaleesi by my side, Missy said, and as Dany looked to the Khal, she could have sworn he looked both sad and eager. I had given up hope until I saw the silver hair. You wish me to be your Catsley, she said, surprised, and he nodded when Missy spoke her words. She waited a few moments and tried to get her words straight, to turn him down and do so without causing anger or resentment. You saw the dragons? She asked, and he nodded. One was stolen from me. I seek the man who did so. I will not wed until I find my lost child. Should you find him for me, then I will be your Khaleesi, but until then, I must seek him out myself, she said, and waited until Missy had spoken. She saw no reaction on the Khal's face. He just looked at her, and then he smiled before he nodded. When next we meet, either I or you will have found your lost child. I will ask again then, he said, and got up, walking over to her. He held his hand out to her, and she took it, and he helped her up as if she weighed nothing. Though she barely came to his chest, she looked up into his eyes and saw him looking down at her. No one had ever looked at her that way. That he wanted her was clear. That look she knew all too well. But there was something more in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place, and she found herself missing that look when he left the tent. They woke the next morning to find the Khalasar gone. The tents they'd left for them and the others still remained, and there were some food and pouches of water left also. But it was the two women who walked towards her leading a silver horse that Dany concentrated on, that they were Dothraki, was clear, and they also didn't seem to be much older than Dany either. A gift from the Khali, Missy said as one of the women spoke and handed Dainty the reins of the silver filly. Who are they? She asked as she stroked the horse's neck. Idarajeki, the Khal asked them to travel with you, Missy said, and Dany looked to Sandor and Shiera, both of them looking as confused as she was. As she stroked the horse, though, she smiled and found herself wondering what she may say should she meet the Khal again. The Reach 2096 AC, Jaehaerys Targaryen. The flight from the Tower of Joy was calm and peaceful. He felt different somehow, more in tune with what was around him, and with Rhaenys. With Arthur, too, it was as if they'd come to an understanding. The knight's doubts would perhaps always remain, and he felt grateful for that, but something had changed with them also. It was as if the man's faith had been restored somewhat, be it in him or in his father Jax. Wasn't sure. That too was different, and Rhaenys was most happy about it. He was Jaehaerys Targaryen. Jon Snow was a name he'd been forced to bear, a name he'd been forced to pretend to be, but it was no longer who he was. He had been born a king. It was what he'd told himself he would be because others had wished it for him, their desires becoming his own, but now it was also what he truly wished to be. As they flew over Hornhill, he knew where he was going and found himself excited to get there. They landed in a small field when James felt the deer nearby. It was still dark, and they could have gone further, but Rhaenys needed to eat, and so Jay directed her down. Once she was on the ground, he warged into the deer, quickly bringing it close enough so that the stag couldn't run, and then he opened his eyes. Gods, she's quick when she wishes to be, Arthur said, and Jay laughed as Rhaenys had taken to the air and caught the deer before it made it even halfway back to the woods. She's hungry and tired, though she'd have flown through the night to get there. Highgarden? Arthur asked. To see my wife, Jay said, and the knight turned his head. Wife? We married by the heart tree under the old gods, Walder officiated, he said as they started the fire. You didn't tell me? Apart from Jair's, Walder, and Ghost, I didn't tell anyone, he said as he looked to the knight who was staring back at him. Why? Arthur asked. I knew you'd talk me out of it, you or Jaime, one of you anyway, he said, and Arthur smirked. Today you're like your mother, Jay, Arthur said, and Jay nodded. They left early that night, almost as soon as darkness fell, so eager was he to make it to Highgarden. Rosiax left them a few miles from the keep itself, landing in a covered forest, and he arranged to meet her there in a few days' time, she deciding to go fly out over the waters to the west. Leaning against her, he closed his eyes, feeling her in his mind, and he in hers. their bond even stronger than it had been. "Be safe, little brother," Rhaenys said. "You too, big sister," he said, and then she was in the air, and he watched as she flew west. They walked a few miles in the opposite direction of Highgarden itself, purchasing 2 horses in a small village. The smith was glad of the coin, and though the horses weren't anywhere near as good as Winter or Apple's, they'd do for now. It was far better to arrive by horse than to simply turn up on foot. Far fewer questions would be asked. The ride to Highgarden took less than an hour, and when they reached the keep they were soon greeted by Garland as the others were at lunch. "Jon?" Garland said, surprised to see him and Arthur. "Hi, it's me. Can you have someone see to the horses?" Jon said, taking the sack of the horses back. "Of course, come inside, we were just sitting down to eat. I'm sure you're both hungry." "Aye, we could eat," he said with a smile. They followed Garland down through the corridors, and when they reached the dining hall, he felt himself reach for the tie in his hair, pulling it tighter and seeing both Garland and Arthur's smirks. "Jon?" He heard Sansa shout excitedly when she saw him, and before he knew it, his sister was grabbing him in her arms, Margaery and her cousins jumping up to join her. "Hello, little sister," he whispered as he looked from Margaery to her grandmother and mother and father before looking back to his wife. "Jon, we had no idea you were coming to visit," Margaery said, and he was amazed at her composure. "It was a sudden thing, a surprise, so to speak. Are you hungry? Have you eaten? You look tired?" Sansa said, and he smiled as Fang walked over to him. He followed them over to the table, Lord Mace looking at him confusedly, though friendly with it. "Forgive me, Lord Tyrell, for this interruption. We were passing and thought we'd drop in," he said, and felt a fool saying it. Something it seemed everyone else agreed on, other than Lord Mace, that was. "That's quite all right, Jon. Loras isn't with you, is he?" "No, my lord. He's still in Casterly Rock. Sir Daemon and I were seeing about some items that belonged to my family," he said, and saw Olenna look at him more curiously now. After eating, he was glad to see Lady Axley whisper to her husband about something to do with the wedding, Garland heading off with them while the others stayed. Though soon Olenna sent Margaery's cousins and Mira to their lessons, and he asked Sansa if they could speak later. His sister reluctantly agreed, and so he, Margaery and Olenna, along with Arthur and the 2 giant guards, made their way to her solar. "Now, if you'd like to explain what you're really doing here, young man," Olenna said as soon as the door was closed. "I've been flying around on Rhaenys, Lady Olenna," he said, and saw both she and Margaery look at him like he'd grown an extra head. "You have?" Margaery said. "I have. We've been to Summerhall and to the Tower of Joy," he said. "Oh, Jon," Margaery said, and he reached out to touch her, only for Olenna to cough. "Just because you married in front of a tree, rules are still rules. Jon and propriety must be maintained," Olenna said. "I'm sorry, Jon, I was..." Margaery said, and he leaned in and whispered in her ear. "That's quite all right, wife." Before he turned to Olenna, "I still intend a more elaborate wedding, my lady, but this one was on me. If you're irked at someone, then it should be me." "Don't worry, I am. But now is not the time. Tell me more of this dragon ride." "Perhaps it's best if I show you." He reached into the bag and took out the eggs, Olenna shaking her head when she saw them, and Margaery reaching down to touch them and pulling her hand away. "It moved," Margaery said. "How did it move without you touching it, Jon?" "These are different. I'll explain later," he said, as he reached in and pulled out the cloth-covered crown, uncovering it and seeing the look on Olenna's face. "Is that..." "Yaquelin's crown, my crown," he said, and saw Margaery smile. He told them then of the flying, of how he knew it was time when he'd gotten back, and how they'd practiced, how they'd flown across the realm from the west to the Riverlands, the Stormlands, Dorne, and the Reach. When Olenna asked if he was not worried that someone may have seen, he told them they'd flown at night, and while there was a chance they'd be seen, who'd believe it? Olenna agreed to allow him to speak to Margaery, but only after he gave his word that he'd be the gentleman he'd been up until now, something he had no problem doing, and so he was snuck into Margaery's room. Arthur and Lefter, was it right, sent with him to allow him to sneak in and out again. Once inside, he turned to her, and as she went to speak, he silenced her with a kiss. "Jon, grandmother," she said when he broke from it. "Do you really wish to speak on your grandmother just now?" he said, and she smirked before kissing him again. "I've missed you terribly, you know," she said as they sat on the bed. Margaery leaning into him as he wrapped his arm around her. "As have I you. It won't be long, Marge. I know it's hard, but it is for both of us. You're not alone in it." "I know," she said, smiling at him. How did they find out? He asked, and she told him what had happened, and then embarrassingly spoke about the pin. You saw me? I did. We spoke, Jon. You were leaving and I didn't wish you to, but it was as if we were there together, she said, shaking her head. Where is it? She got up from the bed and walked to the dresser before grabbing the pin and bringing it back. As he looked at it, he saw the blood that was still pooled inside, Marguerite saying she'd cleaned it, but that it wouldn't go away. He found himself pricking his own finger, watching as his blood pooled, and then nothing. Not until Marguerite did the same. Almost the instant she did so, they were together in a small glade. Jon? Marguerite called. Marguerite, he replied, looking at her. You came? She said happily. Always, whenever you need me, whenever you seek me, I'll be here, he said, and Marguerite nodded. They woke a few minutes later, and she looked at him and asked if he had truly been there with her, and he nodded. How? She asked. Magic. I don't understand it, but I think it'll work now, he said as she allowed her blood to drip on the pin again. Though nothing happened, and he nodded as he began seeing it more clearly. Jon, it's like with the glass candles, it cools down, Marguerite, and so you can't use it all the time. It needs to recharge, magically. I don't understand, she said, and he didn't fully either, and yet he knew that what he was saying was the truth. Give it some time, wait, and then use it again, and it'll work. But once you have, it'll then take time to be able to be used again. So don't use it until you really wish to, he said, and she nodded. Will you stay for a bit? She asked. I'm to meet Rhaenys in 2 days. 2 days, she said, and the look on her face made him determined to make them memorable. Standing in the field 2 days later, he felt he hoped he had. And as Rhaenys landed, he and Arthur climbed on her back and took off. Flying from Highgarden to the west, he tried not to look back at the keep and tried not to think when he would see Marguerite again. She'd been so disappointed when he said he'd not be able to come to the wedding that it had almost crushed him to see her that way. The idea that she was both just a dragon ride away and yet also moons away was something that preyed on his mind all the way back to the rock. Landing by the cove, he nodded to Arthur to go get some rest. He had agreed to spend the night with the dragons in the cave. As he slept beside them, he dreamed of the glade, wondering if it was a real place or some figment of his imagination, and wondering if, when she called, would he be able to go back there again. King's Landing, 2096 AC. Barristan. One thing that Barristan could say about being in his king's service is that the things he had ignored before, little things he'd paid no attention to, suddenly became things he'd see and care about. That the queen was now sleeping with one of his supposed brothers was one such thing, and it only reinforced just how much the order had fallen in his opinion. Another was just how devious the Master of Coin truly was, be it the fact that Barristan knew he too was sleeping with someone he shouldn't, or the way the man's eyes and whole demeanor had lit up when the letter to the king came. That Eddard Stark wished to put aside his wife officially should make Baelish so happy, only confirmed to him his part in the attempts on his king. Jon Arryn was even more on an enigma. He had almost lost it with the king and then the High Septon when he too arrived with a letter from Stark. To hear the man rant and rave over the mere idea that a man could do what so many others had, Barristan began to wonder what exactly it was that upset him so, only finding out accidentally when he overheard the conversation between the Hand and the Master of Whisperers. Who does that savage think he is? Jon Arryn shouted. His Grace, my lord? Lomas asked. No, Stark, he thinks just because he worships a tree, he can set aside a woman of faith. Jon Arryn said angrily. My whispers tell me he and Lady Serwyn have become close, my lord. Perhaps he wishes to marry again. Lomas said. Well, he's bloody well not allowed to, is he? He married under the true faith, and I'll see that he stays bloody married. Of course, my lord. Find out more about these certs for warrants for me, Lomas? I will, my lord. He'd been surprised that it was a faith thing and not a political one, but then sometimes the crown and the Hand made moves that were too petty and foolish to be political, be it Robert's own reluctance to rule or the Hand allowing his own feelings to force them in a certain direction. Barristan almost smirked at times at their incompetence. That, and he hoped it would long continue. It would only be an asset to them when it came time to make their move. To that end, he had been doing some thinking, too. Sir Trex was a good sort, and he'd like to see him given a chance. Sir Treachard even more so. The others he cared not about. They were brothers in name only. His true brothers were out there still, doing the job he longed to be able to do. He readied himself for his shift and made his way from White Sword Tower. Sir Richard a calm night? He asked when he reached the prince's room. Indeed, Lord Commander. The prince stayed in his room for most of it. Sir Knight wasn't feeling well. Sir Richard whispered in his ear, making both of them chuckle. Then hopefully he's better this morning, he said, and Sir Richard nodded before walking away. Tommen was up a little more than an hour later. The prince, as always, happy to see him on duty, and once he had given him the wink, Barristan led him to the dining room so he could break his fast. Guarding Tommen was an absolute joy. That he and Myrcella were related to Joffrey was something at times he couldn't get his head around. Though thankfully, with the prince in Dragonstone, he was one less problem to deal with, and it was a far better one he guarded here today. As usual, Tommen helped Myrcella in her garden, and then asked him to take him to the sparring yard. They had only begun sparring, and the boy had gone from almost scared to excited very quickly. To Barristan's mind, he was already a far better prospect with a sword than his brother, though he needed to train more and thankfully had found the right incentive to do so. "Will you tell me the story today?" Tommen asked after he deflected a blow from Barristan's sword. "You wish to hear it again, my prince," he said, smiling. The excited nod of the prince's head making it clear he did so. Sir Duncan the Tall arrived at an inn on the way to the tourney of Ashford Meadow. Barristan began, the prince's eyes lighting up as he began the tale. As he led the prince back to his rooms that night, he could see the boy was tired and worn out. They'd sparred, chased after the prince's kittens, and Barristan had told him tale after tale. Just before he was going into his room, Tommen stopped and looked at him and ran his fingers through his blonde hair. "Do you think it'd be better if I cut my hair, Sir Barristan, like egg?" Tommen asked, looking to him eagerly. "I doubt there's any need for that. Your father likes Sir Jon, and I'm sure if he asks him, then he'd take you to Squire," he said, seeing the boy's smile light up his face. "So you can keep your hair for now, my prince," he said, mussing the boy's hair and making him laugh. Will you? Tommen stuttered. "I'll write to Sir Jon on your behalf, my prince, I give you my word on it," he said. "And a knight should never break his word," Tommen said determinedly. "A true knight should not now go sleep. I'll write today," he said. And Tommen nodded, running into the room. He heard him telling Sir Wolf, Sir Knight, and Sir Dunk, his 3 latest kittens, all showing his heart's desire. A part of Barristan felt guilty that he was manipulating him so that he was using the prince for his own desires, his wish to be with his king. But it was Jon's words which he came back to, and which strengthened his resolve. "I can protect him, sir, give him a better life than he has, and see he doesn't become a casualty in the war to come," Jon said. "Then I'll play my part, my king." "I know you will, sir." The Shy Maid 206 AC. Jon Connington. He had met with Illyrio and told him of the dragon and that Daenerys had 2 more, Illyrio saying he would take care of it. The Magister had given him the books, and he'd ridden back to go Andropoli and arrived just in time. Haldon and Aegon both struggling to keep the dragon under control, being forced to both drug it more and to use a thin stick to force it back into its cage. They had ended up needing to buy a number of them, given how quickly the dragon grew, and he knew that soon they'd not be able to get one large enough. He truly hoped that the answers would be in these books. Just the thoughts of Aegon leading the Golden Company into battle on Dragonback was more than he could dare to dream. No army could stand before them. They'd need no alliances. People would come and bow to gain their favor, not the other way around. All of that would be lost to them, though, if they couldn't control Balerion, and he was proving far more difficult than ever to do so. Every day on his trip to and back from Pentos was one of worry for Jon, that without him there they'd not be able to keep the dragon caged. So when he saw the Shy Maid in the distance and saw Aegon and Duck sparring on the deck, he breathed in and smiled, riding hard to cover the last few yards. "Griff, you've returned," Haldon said, excitedly looking at the mules and the sacks of books he carried with him. "I have Balerion. More and more I'm forced to put the dragon to sleep. Griff, I need answers." "Well, hopefully you'll find them in there." "Hopefully, my friend," Haldon said as Duck and Akin walked from the boat. "Griff, did you find what we need?" Aegon said, his voice, his poise, becoming more and more kingly every day to Jon's eyes. "I did, Akan. Come, let's help the Maester with them. The sooner we do so, the sooner we can have your dragon be truly yours," he said, and Akan's smile was true and good. "You've done excellent work once again, Griff. I'll not forget this," Aegon said. Over the next few days, while Haldon and Aegon pored over the books, Jon checked in on the dragon. Balerion hadn't much room to move in the cage, and Haldon said the draughts he'd give the dragon had stopped the fire. Something the Half-Master and Aegon had argued about, apparently. They had built a temporary shelter on deck for the dragon. The cage was able to be slid in and out of it. They'd had no other choice, as it had soon grown far too big for the Haldens' rooms. Looking in on the sleeping dragon, even Jon felt a little sad for it. This was no way for such a magnificent beast to be kept. If only it would just accept its rider, he thought, then it could be treated far better. "Well," he asked Haldon as they ate that night. "The language, Jon, the language and the blood are key, I believe." Haldon said, and he, Lemore, Duck, and Aegon listened on eagerly as they were told what he'd found. It seemed far too simple to Jon. Surely there was more to it than that. But no, it seemed commands needed to be spoken in Valyrian, something which Aegon was overjoyed about, and that Aegon's blood would bind him to the dragon. Over the next few days, Haldon and Aegon slowly allowed the dragon to come around. They stopped giving it the sleeping draughts, and its food and its fire came back, though far less dangerous than it had been. When Aegon worried that this would be all the fire that Balerion was capable of, Haldon explained that once the sleeping draughts were out of its blood, it would be far stronger. That this, in fact, was a blessing, as it allowed them to form the bond with less danger, something that Jon felt incredibly relieved about. "Dracarys Balerion," Aegon said, holding a piece of meat on a thin stick. The dragon looked from Aegon to the meat, and to Aegon again, almost seeming to turn its head slightly, but no flame came. "Dracarys Balerion," Aegon said again with the same outcome. Once again, it was Haldon who realized the problem. They'd not formed the bond yet, and the dragon also wasn't hungry. Jon watched on as the Hoffmeister cut Aegon's palm, the pained yelp from his king, making him immediately move to his sword, only for Aegon to brave his way through the agony. He looked on as his king held his hand over the dragon's mouth, the blood dripping from it, and then he, Haldon, and the others marveled when Balerion drank it down. "Guess, Jon, did you see that?" "He took it, Jon," Aegon said happily. Later that night, he watched as Aegon fed the dragon meat, Balerion eating it eagerly. His flames were still small, but more than enough to cook the meat, and Aegon was almost overfeeding it. So impressed was he with his control, each night he'd sit and look on as Aegon would speak to the dragon, hold conversations with it, the dragon listening as intently as Jon did. "Casey, Solvagon, Henkiri, Balerion, we will fly together, Balerion," Aegon said. Jon and Duck sitting there drinking as Aegon continued. "Mazamili, Arli, Nuhademalion, Henkiri, we will take back my throne together," Aegon said. Jon, looking on as his king reached out to stroke the dragon's neck. The growls and grunts the dragons made were signs of his joy at being with his rider, according to Haldon. Looking on, Jon could see it wasn't just the dragon who was joyful, his king too seeming far happier than he ever had been. "Lekiloni Eorgon against Ilva Kessasagon, Redan Leda Persis. Anagaya Persisi Anagard. Those who stand against us will be met with fire and blood." Berzian, fire and blood. Aegon said, and Jon nodded. They would indeed my king, he thought as he watched them. Waking early the next morning, he was surprised by the excited shouts from beside the ship. Barely taking time to dress and grabbing his sword, he ran to the deck to see the dragon flying a few feet in the sky. Not too far away, given the rope tied to its neck, but just stretching its wings. Seeing it in the air, he could see just how large it was, and he wondered, would it reach the size of its namesake, as he watched Aegon struggle with the rope, though he grew concerned. "Aegon, be careful!" he shouted. "All is well, Jon. Watch. Tegun Balerion. Tegun. Land Balerion. Land." As Jon looked on, the dragon didn't land. He didn't seem like he was ever going to. Moving nervously, he heard Aegon tell the dragon to land again. "Tegun Balerion. Tegun," Aegon said, and Jon then looked on in amazement as the dragon landed. "How long?" he asked Haldon, as Aegon leaned in to rub the dragon. "He brought it out this morning. Sometimes it takes longer for the dragon to listen than others. But he listens, Jon. The blood, Aegon's blood, and the language, they were the keys," Haldon said happily. They celebrated that night. A small celebration anyway. Lemore cooked her specialty, and Jon even allowed Aegon a few glasses of wine. Not too many. The king he would replace was a drunk. His king wouldn't be. Aegon slept on the deck as he did most nights now, laying beside the dragon and reinforcing the bond they'd built up. A few days later, he came back from sending the letter to Illyrio, telling him of their success, to find Aegon and Haldon arguing. "What's going on?" he said, stepping between the two of them. "Tell him, Jon. Tell him." "I am the king." He doesn't get to tell me what to do. No one does. Aegon said, glaring at the half-master. Heldon? He asked, confused. Aegon wishes to take the dragon's ropes and collar off it. Jon, it's not ready yet. The bond is growing, but it's not fully formed. Heldon said. Nor will it if Baelion can't trust me. He needs to know that I'm his rider, and that I'll look after him, as he will me. I've read the books too, Jon. Jurgen said angrily. Is this true? He said, turning to Halden. It does say something like that, but it's unclear, Halden said. Zachary says Bozdari Ixos dire. A dragon is not a slave. Aegon said, and Jon looked to him. What? A dragon is not a slave, Jon. We're hurting him by treating him as one, and we're making him less than he could be, just like the ones my family kept in the dragon pit. Aegon said contemptuously. Halden?
It's too dangerous, Jon,
Halden said, shaking his head. In time, yes, but not now. He quickly added, when Aegon moved towards him. Aegon, perhaps. No, Jon, I'm your king, am I not? Always, he said, nodding. Then I order you to do this. Will you respect my order, Jon? Aegon said, looking at him. The look a hard one for Jon to figure out. Was it pleading? Was his king pleading with him to take his part? Always, your grace, he said, a moment later. Halden walking off in a huff, muttering and shaking his as he left the deck and went down to his room. He looked on as Aegon opened the cage and Balerion walked out, the dragon looking directly at Eoden and not at anyone else. The way it tilted its neck, almost offering the collar to be removed, made Jon gasp. Did it know? Could it feel what Aegon was about to do? Was the bond between them that strong? Within a moment, the collar and rope were gone, and he looked on as Aegon rubbed the dragon where he collar had been. So Vegan Balerion, Aegon said, and with a few flaps of his wings, the dragon was in the air. Aegon turning back to look at Jon with a smile on his face. The flames came quick, the screams came next, and while the others threw water on the burning deck, Jon dragged Aegon away from them. Using his cloak, he covered his king. The screams had stopped, and he didn't know if it was because Aegon had died or if he'd simply passed out from the pain. With the fire out and Halden and Duck lifting Aegon up and carrying him below deck, all Jon could do was watch as the dragon flew east. Zeza Darazis Buzdari Exos. Daor. A dragon is not a slave, he thought bitterly as he heard Aegon's screams from beneath him.